Hey YouTube, I'm going to start at chapter 6. That's chapter 6, my apologies. And this is the flight. The sun had arisen and Nahum and Harim were at their post as usual, not a soul in the city suspecting their having been beyond their master's dwellings. Abimelech, who firmly believed that at least one of them, if not both, would be slain before this time, was still in bed, sleeping off the last night's debauch. The few who had seen them leave and enter the city gates had not recognized them, and not even for 1 ounce suspected their identity, while the only men whom they might have feared were locked up in a secure prison guarded by stout and trusty men. But the city was in great commotion. Guardsmen and soldiers were running hither and thither, while a strong detachment of horsemen were preparing to leave the town. On calling the roll of the guard at sunrise, the absence of their captain and 3 of the best men were discovered. Messengers that were at once dispatched to the several dwellings of the missing men had returned with the intelligence that they had not been at home that night, while it was also ascertained that they had no special duties assigned them which might have called them abroad. FOREX had been in the habit of strolling out of the city when relieved from his duty, and not unfrequently was he joined on these excursions by one or the other of his intimate followers. As the immediate neighborhood of the city was thronged with houses of shame and pleasure, but always had they returned long before sunrise so as to be present at the roll call every morning. Yet on this morning they had not made their appearance. 3 hours had already elapsed and no tidings of the missing, when at last some of the men who had been on duty the previous night bethought themselves of the 3 men they had seen to leave the city, and whom, after courteously accompanying them to the gate, FOREX undoubtedly had followed. But the 3 men might have been the soldiers did not know, as they had been too far off when their captain conversed with them. Sorry, y'all. I'm trying, I left my little mechanism that was holding my phone, and I think I'm going to have to go and get it. I'm going to try to get through this. Okay. Sorry. My apologies. Okay, so they were too far off when their captain conversed with them, and they could not give a correct description of their outward appearance. Inquiries were now set on foot in every direction. The suburbs were strictly searched, but all in vain. All the guardsmen of the city had been interrogated, but nothing had been elicited. The lieutenant of the southern gate, which was the most frequented by the gentry and the king's officers, had let in and out so many during the previous night, and seen so many royal passports, that he was not able to recall to mind any special circumstance. But he was sure that nothing suspicious had come under his observation. When Abimelech had stepped off the effects of his bout and appeared in the streets, the commotion had reached the highest pitch. The horsemen had returned. They had scoured the country for miles around the city. They have entered every house and building they saw. The dwelling of old Mordecai, whom they found with his assistant busy planting some rare flowers, not accepted, but to no purpose. FOREX and his followers had not been found. Mordecai had trembled when he saw the horsemen approaching, but he soon mastered his emotion. And well might he tremble, for the soft soil of the garden which stretched out in front of his house had retained the footprints not only of Nahum, Harim and Lamech, but also those of Barak and his followers. A circumstance he had not thought of before, but now he remembered it, and his anxiety therefore may well be imagined. Then too a strict observer could possibly have detected the subterranean chamber, although it was hidden, as well as human ingenuity could do it. He had one or the other being discovered. Ruin, complete ruin, would have been certain, and all his plans would have been frustrated on the eve of their maturity. But fortunately, the horsemen were no strict observers. They chatted gaily as they rode along, while the hoofs of their steeds obliterated the aforementioned track so completely as to make them altogether undiscernible. Arrived in front of the house, two only dismounted and proceeded to examine the interior, but as they were in a hurry, they contented themselves carelessly looking in both rooms, and not seeing anything suspicious there. They returned and reported to their comrades the result of the search. Hereupon the whole troop returned by the same way they had come, and the obliteration of all tracks now became perfect. So God used the horses. Okay, so a more heartfelt thanksgiving, I trow, has never ascended to Jehovah's throne. By Jehovah, that's the hijack. That which went up out of the breast of the old gardener when the last horseman had passed out of sight. On learning the state of affairs, Abimelech was nearly driven frantic. His firm friend and confidant, the man of all others whom he could entrust with any, even the bloodiest, most wicked and monstrous orders, sure to be obeyed to the very letter, was gone too, before his hated rival had been hurled out of existence. Another man must be found to do the murderous deed. But where to find him? Where was the man so well acquainted with all the secrets of the court and its surroundings, or so well known among the officers of the king's and minister's household, who would sell himself for gold? The execution of his fell plans must be postponed, perhaps abandoned, or he himself must do the work, but that he dared not attempt. While in this terrible mood, he bethought himself of Hermon, and straight to the royal palace he went. On being announced, he was at once shown to the apartments of the king's daughter, who, to his surprise and intensest joy, welcomed him with a warmth and cordiality that were altogether too sudden, too intense to be real. But he saw it not. Blind fool as he was, he did not perceive what even the most careless observer must have seen, that this was only a mask assumed to hide the disgust and abhorrence the maiden felt in his presence. But his vanity was flattened, and already he beheld himself, Hermon's husband, wielding Assyria's scepter, clothed in purple of royalty. I'm going to read that again. But his vanity was flattened, and already he beheld himself. Hermon's husband, wielding Assyria's scepter, clothed in purple of royalty, short-sighted mortal, the very maiden who now smiled upon him so sweetly pure and feeble, though she would have felt no remorse in sheathing her dagger in his black heart. She was cold, but she now spoke kindly to him. She regretted the long estrangement between them, and altogether succeeded. succeeded so well in flattering his vanity that he really believed himself the object of her sincere affection. But when she told him that on the morrow she would give him a final answer, when she held out to him the strongest hopes that this answer would be a favorable one, he was quite beside himself. He threw himself at her feet, and he protested his love and his readiness even to die for her in such strong terms that she almost believed him in earnest. And he mentally swore that she did love none but him, and that all Barak had told him of her attachment to Nahum was base calumny and falsehood. Could that conceited young man only have foreseen what the morrow had in store for him? But I must not anticipate, and will let him enjoy his brief triumph. After another half-hour's conversation, he retired, believing himself the happiest man alive. Nahum and Hiram, in the meantime, had not been idle. Their efforts, as well as those of the maidens, were packed and conveyed to the house of Abraham, an old Jew who lived in one of the numerous alleys of the city, and where old Mordecai was wont to put up his coming into town, as he frequently did, with horse and cart loaded with the products of his garden, which he then disposed of to the inhabitants. Ample disguise had been provided for the maidens, and the different Israelites in Nineveh, who had previously been sounded, and who had declared their willingness to share the fortunes of Nahum and his friends, were notified that the ensuing night was fixed for their departure. Most of the people had already, and under various pretexts, sent their wives and children with such of their effects as they could conceal around their persons out of the city, and were preparing to follow them as opportunity might offer. Hey y'all, I'm back. I'm working. Anyway, I like when I have pleasant customers call in. I've been called, sorry, give me a moment. Yeah, I've been called nigger twice over the phone, and you can't even really react. So all I can do is just take it. But in the meanwhile, you know, in my mind, I'm just letting them have it. And what I do is just write my contractors and let them have it. Like, y'all need to do something. Yeah, and I was going to answer that call, but it's certain calls I don't answer. And that's the perk of having your own business. Okay, so back to the book. And by the way, if anybody out there wants to work from home, I don't get commission. I'm not promoting it. You make your own schedule. Just hit me up for the information, and I'll be happy to put it out there. Okay, so we're getting back to the book. And I'm sorry, I didn't answer the calls. Okay, I'm so sorry, y'all. Anyway, I'm just tripping off. Here's Abraham, the house of Abraham, right? And he was an old Jew who lived in one of the numerous alleys of the city, and where old Mordecai was. Oh, come on. This story is getting juicy, y'all. I'm ready for it too. Okay. So old Mordecai was wont to put up his coming into town, as he frequently did, with horse and cart loaded with the products of his garden, which he then disposed of to the inhabitants. Ample disguises had been provided for the maidens and the different Israelites in Nineveh, who had previously been sounded, and who had declared their willingness to share the fortunes of Nahum and his friends. were notified that the ensuing night was fixed for their departure. Most of these people had already, under various pretexts, sent their wives and children with such of their effects as they could conceal around their persons out of the city, and were preparing to follow them as opportunity might offer. Old Mordecai seemed very busy that day. 3 times already he had been in town with his cart, which each time he took back well filled. But as he was in the habit of taking different things, such as seeds, plants, and particularly the city's offals for manuring purposes, all of which generally were collected by Abraham and stored in his yard till removed by the old gardener out of the town. Whenever he came in, this circumstance occasioned no surprise. The commotion in the city meantime had not subsided, and under cover of the din and confusion that generally ensue on occasions of that sort, Mordecai and his confederates quietly and securely worked on till at the length of about 2 hours before nightfall everything was ready to the removal of the men themselves. This too was soon effected, and most of the fugitives pretending to go in search of their wives and families, while others had been accustomed to going in and out of the city at any hour during the day. And as each Israelite had been marked with some token of servitude, so as to be easily recognizable, these marks served as so many passports, which were duly respected by all public officials. At last there remained but Nahum, Harim, Hermon, and Tamar, who could not have left the city before night without creating suspicion. It was therefore arranged that they should leave as soon as possible after the 10th hour by the western gate, where some of Hermon's staunchest friends had been put on duty, and where Mordecai promised to be in attendance. With a score or 2 of his best and bravest men, Abimelech, in the meantime, had left the royal palace and adjourned to one of his favorite public resorts, where he was sure to find some of his companions with whom to talk over the events of the day. In this he was not disappointed, as he found quite a number of the dissipated gentry of Nineveh awaiting his coming. They, on his appearance, were boisterously hailed him as the great man of the day, who, as the next after the king, was to be expected to take the most active and prominent part in affair, and rain such a shower of eager questions upon him, that for a moment he was quite nonplussed. After order in a measure being restored, he explained to them, as far as he had understood it himself, the cause of the public commotion, and said he take my word for it, none but one cursed and miserable captives are at the bottom of all this. Already some of my secret spies have seen that villainous head steward of the king, and that arrogant fellow who acts as head groom in Almanzor's, I don't call him Alman everything, it's Almanzor's stable, take a quantity of boxes and packages to the stopping place of that old Jewish gardener in Dog Alley, and the latter has removed them out of the city. I could at once have pounced in upon that affair and sport the game, but I prefer to bide my time, and when it does come, I do assure you, I shall sing them such a song as they will not forget in all their lives. But at present, I have other matters to occupy me. I'm tripping. But at present, I have other matters to occupy my thoughts, and heart-key matters of some import, as well as cause for gladsome rejoicings. Ho, my jolly Pancratius of the never-failing bowl, Fill our gaping tankards to the brim, and you, my trusty companions, in many a glorious bout, sit around me while I relate the day's wonderful revelations. Mine host soon brought the fresh supply, and the friends formed a ring around the conceited braggart, while he, in a drawling and cracked voice, continued, I tell ye, the game is all in my own hands now. Shalmaneser is subdued, and my most royal and beautiful lioness is tamed. Tamed in such a way as quite surprised even me. Only think of it. When I called on her today to hear my final doom, she like a cooing dove received me with outstretched arms, regretted the long estrangement between us, and called me her dear friend and cousin. Tomorrow I am to receive the reward of my constancy from her own ruby lips, and then for a serious sceptre. A wedding we will have such as the world never saw before, and once in my power, my most noble bride shall soon learn to acknowledge me as her lord and master. The wildest acclamations followed this grand speech, and many of the young men present hastened to swear allegiance to their future ruler, while some more sober and cool than the rest ominously shook their heads. All very fine, one of these latter remarked, but I fear me, all's not gold that glitters. Most strange is it that Hermione, who never even tried to conceal the disgust and abhorrence she felt at the approach of her cousin, should all once have changed so wonderfully. So he come in and he hating. Either he knows the plan or he's just trying to bust his bubble. Okay. If there's not something behind all this, then set me down for a croaking raven. And in this opinion, some of the others joined, until at length even Abimelech, sorry, I try, was forced to acknowledge that these things did wear a somewhat suspicious look, but he was not cast down. He was sure of his game. If his spies had not been greatly mistaken, the two Jews, Nahum and Hiram, intended to make a decisive move that very night, and would it not only easy but glorious fun to pounce down upon them in the act, at once have them destroyed. And at once have them destroyed. And there was yet another thing. When thus far he had kept to himself, he had long suspected, and his spies had confirmed it, that a great many of the captive Israelites were leagued, and that they must have some final object in view. Many were the stealthy interviews and conversations between Mordecai, his nephews, and many of their countrymen that had been duly betrayed to Abimelech. While the events of that day plainly indicated that something important must be going on, as the unusual stir among the Israelites and the uncommon number of Israelitish women and children who had on that day left their city under various pretenses had been faithfully reported to him. And when he at last ascertained that Nahum and Hiram were preparing for a move, he no longer doubted that night had been fixed upon for some great undertaking. But what that undertaking really was, he did not know, as all his knowledge regarding the affair was only based on suspicion. It would now have been very easy for him to prevent the captives from going any further than they had already done, but to do this, his suspicions must be made public, and that he did not wish to do. He had his own reason for letting matters progress to their completion. Then he would interfere with as little help as possible, and falling upon those whom he considered mortal enemies of his nation, On the eve of their success, he meant at once to crush them and to be regarded by his countrymen as their savior and liberator. That done, his way would be clear, and the possession of Hermione, as she would no longer dare to oppose his wishes. How he meant to gain her affection has been indicated by his different conversations with his companions. And now, my friends, he concluded, as I know that you are all true to me, that I can trust you, and moreover, as you will not be losers if I gain my object, I have decided on making you my companions in this enterprise. Therefore, let our jolly host once more fill our tankards, so he can waste it while he planning on running up on these gods. Sounds good, right? So you're going to get drunk first. So he asked them to fill once more their tankards, that we may drink a fortunate result to our undertaking. And then he was suddenly interrupted by the entrance of a man in the costume of an artisan, who, after making a peculiar sign, retired to the farther end of the room. Abimelech hastily arose and joined the newcomer, who briefly informed him that him and Hiram would leave the town soon after the 10th hour. By the western gate, where the watch had been assigned to Akbar, a man well known as one of the most faithful adherents to the royal house. Abimelech thanked the messenger, rewarded him handsomely, and told him that his services for the day would be required no more. Whereupon the man withdrew. And now continued the speaker on returning to his companion, let's home to arm for our enterprise. The tankards were refilled, and while his companions quaffed the delicious wine, Abimelech informed them of the messenger's report and bade them hasten home, arm themselves, and reassemble in certain locality outside the western gate. Then they all took their leave. It was near the 11th hour. The night was beautiful and clear. The moon, now in its full, was just rising above the hills that bounded the view to the eastward of the city, when Nahum and Hiram, accompanied by Hermione, who on leaving the supper table about an hour before had taken a most affectionate leave of her father, who somewhat wandered thread, as he of course expected to see her again the next morning, and Tamar, both dressed as pages of the royal household, stood before Akbar in front of the western gate. That official, who was well acquainted with our friends, at once opened the massive portal and let the four wanderers out. Once out of the city, the fugitives directed their steps toward a small copse of oaks and cedars, where they were quickly joined by Lamech, who informed them that Mordecai, with 25 of their best men, was stationed not a stone's throw off, completely concealed by the shrubbery, where they would halt until assured that the fugitives were not pursued, and then they would follow upon. Oh, Jean, it's getting good. And then they would follow and soon join them. Our party now hastened on, and when they came in sight of Mordecai's dwelling, they resolved to stop and await their friends. Abimelech and his companions had gone home and armed themselves, whereupon they had left the city and assembled in the place chosen for rendezvous. Okay. Here they refreshed themselves with copious draughts of sweet wine, and then went forth to reconnoitre. Ere long, they beheld our fugitives, and by the light of the clear shining moon, they had no difficulty in recognizing in the two leaders of the party the detested Jews Nahum and Hiram. All at once Abimelech gave a violent start and convulsively grasped the arm of his nearest follower, for in one of the seeming pages he had recognized the now unveiled features of Hermon. Hell and furies, he gasped. Look here, dost behold that face by all the fiends. It is she, my affianced, his fiancée, led away by that accursed villain. He was quite overcome by rage and mortification, but soon he rallied and turning to his companions, he continued, Now, my friends, now is the time for action. Now we will annihilate those dastardly enemies of our nation. Stand by me, and my royal favors shall be granted to all who help me. Half of you turn to the left, and by a quick march head them off, while I with the rest will cut off their retreat. Be quick and silent now, and the day will soon be ours. And hearken, as soon as my hands hold the scepter of this kingdom, no favor shall be too great, but cheerfully will I grant it to each of you. Okay, my apologies. I had a call, and I just want to know who calls, and you're calling infomercials to do prank calls. I guess that's what people do. It's so stupid to me. But regardless, I get paid, so I'm not bothered. Okay, so let's move on. I was using my Abimelech voice before I was rudely interrupted. Now, I'm going to start right here. Now, my friends, now is the time for action. Now we will annihilate those dastardly enemies of our nation. Stand by me, and my royal favor shall be granted to all who help me. Half of you turn to the left, and by a quick march, head them off, while I with the rest will cut off their retreat. Be quick and silent now, and the day will soon be ours. And hearken, as soon as my hands hold the scepter of this kingdom, no favor shall be too great, but cheerfully I will grant it to each of you. So he gonna look out for him once he gets the scepter of their kingdom. So we're gonna see what's gonna happen, okay? Maybe I should do a deep voice. I don't think my voice was deep enough for his excitement. Okay. How did I get way down here? Sorry, y'all. I was trying to be quick. Never works out. I don't remember where I was. Stopping to wait there, friend. Okay, I'm so sorry. But when I'm reading, I'm not really recognizing the words because I'm just reading, and sometimes it'll click in, goes in and out in my head. So I'm looking over to see where I stop. And I think I'm here. Hold on. So I have all this already. Ooh, that's some sweet talk. Yes, he continued. Okay. I was just reading the voice of him being all excited. And now I'm lost. I'm so sorry, y'all. Okay. Okay, so I found it. I remember the artisan coming in. And then he was drinking. He stepped off with artisan. Okay, here we go. Okay, so he's gonna hook everybody up, right? Okay. I need to start looking at the pages. That was rough. Yes, he continued in a lower tone from between his clenched teeth. Yes, my rover. That's not where I am. Oh, yeah. Oh, so he is still talking to them. Yes, he continued in a lower voice from between his clenched teeth. Yes, my royal bride, you will yet be mine, and your promise that tomorrow I am to receive the reward of my constancy will yet be fulfilled. So he gonna make her marry him. But beware, my coy dove. All the pangs I have suffered at thy hands will be revisited on thy head, and the memory of that Jewish dog I will make one anguish and torture to thee. Hey, if I must tear your very heart out of your bosom. Dang, so he crazy in love, Lord. But the departure of the one half of his friends soon turned his thoughts in another direction, and not entertaining the least doubt that the capture of the fugitives would be an easy affair for them, he could hardly await the signal for moving on. Meantime, our wanderers had come to a halt, as we have seen before, to await old Mordecai, and on suddenly perceiving a party of men emerging into the path before them, they went on, believing these men to be their friends. Scarcely had they begun to move forward, and when a shrill whistle sounded by the party in front fell on their ears, and a moment later the signal was answered by an exultant cry in the rear. Still they doubted not that the men they saw were really their friends, and Nahum and Harem, preceded by Lamech in charge of the two maidens, pushed on into the youth who sharing the belief of his brother and cousin, had turned his whole attention to the disguised females. All at once raised his eyes and recognized in the party before him their mortal foes. When the what just happened? And see, this little hand making me mad. It's not me this time, y'all. Scarcely they began to move forward when a shrill whistle sounded by the party in front fell on their ears, and a moment later the signal was answered by an exultant cry in their rear. Still they doubted not that the men they saw were really their friends, and Nahum and Harem, preceded by Lamech in charge of the two maidens, pushed on into the youth who sharing the belief of, oh no, what is up? Y'all should see the look on my face. The belief of his brother and cousin had turned his whole attention to the disguised females. All at once raised his eyes and recognized in the party before him their mortal foes. With the quickness of thought he turned and informed Nahum of what he had seen, but scarcely had he done so when the party in the rear came up. Abimelech his features contorted with rage and malignity, stood face to face with his rival. So unexpectedly had their enemies come upon them, and so certain had they felt on their security now that they had come in full view of their destination, that at first our two heroes were quite at a loss. But Lamech soon recalled them in a sense of their situation, and in a whisper informed them that a firm resistance on their part would soon turn the scale in their favor, as the old gardener and his friends could not be far away. The moon was now completely risen, and all her splendor illuminated the scene below. The place where the parties had met was a gentle eminence surrounded on three sides by low shrubbery, here and there interspersed with a stout oak or a towering cedar, while in front and a little further on could be seen the garden and dwelling of old Mordecai. Our fugitives were now surrounded on all sides, and while Hermon, who had been the first to recognize her hated cousin, lay half fainting in the arms of her faithful Tamar, Nahum and Hiram prepared for a determined resistance. Let me find out Tamar was holding Tamar, Nahum. Hermon fainting, and Tamar is holding a while. Okay, so, dog of a Jew, Abimelech hissed, now thy impudence has reached its climax, but by all hades thy race is run. I could smite thee with one stroke of my good blade, but I will preserve thee, dost hear, for a fate worse than 10,000 deaths. And yonder maiden, hold on, y'all, I'm getting too excited. And yonder maiden, whom thou hast dared to pollute with thy touch, I will wring her heart until the memory of thee and thy accursed race shall be one of anguish and torture. Ho there, my friends, to your work! But here, slay not these miserable wretches, for I would preserve them to wrest from them their secrets, preserve them for my own especial pleasure, but disarm and bind them. And above all, secure the 2 pages. One of them I claim as my own, and the other I give up to you. With this, he rushed forward, vainly imagining that the superior number of his followers would awe the fugitives into quick submission. But in this, he soon found himself sadly mistaken, as Nahum, Hiram, and Lamech were well armed and stood like so many rocks, frustrating all attempts to overthrow them. 3 times already were the assailing party driven back with many a smart blow, and some of Abimelech's followers began to loudly refuse their help in a further attempt to take the Israelites alive. So his crew, like, I ain't helping you. That's too much. Okay. When their leader, driven to desperation, snatched the senseless form of Hermon and bade his friends slay those whom they could not secure otherwise, vain order, and the last ever uttered by the haughty Abimelech, for no sooner did Nahum behold his beloved in the grasp of his detested rival than he felt the strength of a lion in his arms, and with one stroke of his stout sword he cleft his enemy in twain. The rest, when they saw the terrible fate of their leader, took to their heels, so they got the hell on. Okay, so, but at that moment Mordecai and his men emerged from the shrubbery, and of the 14 who had followed Abimelech in pursuit of the fugitive Israelites, not one returned to the city. So they handled that. Okay, so when the work was done, Mordecai joined his nephews, and after warmly shaking their hands, he told them that he with his followers had been concealed in the shrubbery near at hand, and that they had seen all that passed. But he continued, I saw there were only 15 in pursuit, and I knew that they were pursuing 2 scions of the royal house of Jehu. Ha ha. I wonder, is that Judah? Okay, so we could easily have come forward and annihilated those weak and cowardly Assyrians, but I disdain such a course, and moreover, I want to give you an opportunity to try the strength of your arms, to regain the confidence in yourself which you might have lost in your captivity. Okay, so he wanted to see, you know, were they still some killers? Were they still lions? You know, they had been in those cages for so long. But anyway, okay, so for all manly virtues, self-reliance is the greatest. I mean, that's the drop. For all manly virtues, self-reliance is the greatest. Man, I need to do a whole vlog on that one sentence. I'm going to say it one more time, then I'll move forward. For all manly virtues, self-reliance is the greatest. But for the worst we had prepared. Lamech had been instructed in case of real danger to give a signal on hearing which we have been with you before any harm could have been done. So he still had his back. But noble youth as he is, he did not want our help while there was a prospect of doing without it. And the result of the engagement has shown that he was right in his calculation. But now the old man added, let us forward without further delay, while I shall order some of our trusty companions to carry the corpses of our slain enemies to the opposite side of the city, so as to lead their friends to the belief that this work has been done by robbers who infest the northern outskirts of Nineveh. In the meantime, Hermon had regained her senses, and before any of her friends were aware of it, or had time to remove the ghastly corpses out of sight, she stood among them tall and erect, her loose hair flying in the night breeze, the very impersonalization of a revenging nemesis. Anon, her gaze fell upon the prostrate form of her slain cousin, while on raising her eyes she beheld the venerable form of Mordecai, and with the startling cry, "Oh, my dream," she sank into the outstretched arms of her faithful lover. But joy never kills. It very seldom even makes one faint, and so Hermon was not killed. She had not even fainted, but only in the exuberance of her feelings she had sunk on the hum's stout bosom. She was soon brought to full sense of her situation, and thereupon the party resumed their march, after 15 of Mordecai's followers had been ordered to remove all traces of the recent conflict. In a short time, and without any further disturbance, they reached the old gardener's cot, and in about an hour afterward they were rejoined by their friends, who informed them that the corpses of the slain had been removed as ordered, and that all traces of the conflict had been obliterated so completely as to be unobservable by the closest scrutiny. Old Mordecai then opened the secret trapdoor, and the entire party descended into the subterranean chambers, leaving the cot and its surroundings shrouded in quiet and darkness. It was now about 3 hours after midnight, and as all the men as well as the maidens were well tired out, they resolved not to disturb the inhabitants of the vault, but to lie down and prepare themselves for a short rest of the work yet before them. Uh-oh, y'all. Okay. So that was chapter 6. And we're going to pick up on chapter 7. Tomorrow, that was a long chapter. Chapter 7 starts on page 98. And this is getting good. So we have an understanding they are leaving. So we're going to pick up on the day after the flight. Peace and blessings, family. I'm going to follow up this video with some drop from drop. So just look out for that. And thank you for listening. And I will read to you tomorrow.